All right, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, April 26, 2017. We're here for the Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Citizen Advisory Committee meeting. Jen, would you please take roll?
Ms. Owens?
Here.
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Ms. Lomas?
Present.
Ms. Weber? Here. And Mr. Smith? Thank you.
All right, thanks. We have a quorum this evening. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the last December meeting?
Move to approve the draft minutes of the last meeting
Second.
as submitted.
Sorry, second?
Vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, Cameron, any agenda adjustments?
No.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we have no members of the public here tonight, so we can move on to...
Wait,
sorry.
Can I make a couple of brief announcements? Number one, George and I were at a meeting last Tuesday in Carpinteria that has some very interesting scenarios and projections for how sea level rise and climate change could affect the South Coast over the next 75 years. Very, very fascinating. It's going to be available online in about 3 to 6 weeks. It's the final report from a 4-year study. And I think anybody who's interested in how watersheds or our coastline are going to be affected would behoove themselves to get a free copy. That same evening, I was at the Faulkner Gallery, and the Santa Barbara Foundation and the LEAF Initiative are rolling out the County Conservation Blueprint. And the most interesting thing for the committee, the staff, and the public at large is that it's basically a free completion of the Conception Coast Project idea from 10 or 15 years ago. And it has 210 different GIS layers overlaid over a pretty detailed map of Santa Barbara County and the edges from Oxnard Ventura up to Morro Bay. And it's available now, and it has an accuracy level down to 6 square meters. And it overlays all the natural resources, historic resources, geological resources, land use, everything you can imagine, which means anyone who's interested in understanding the issues that our staff and our committee are wrestling with and looking at how they relate to the rest of the area or the past or the future, this is a tool that's available. Number 3, I was with our former committee member, Jeff Phillips, this morning at the Success for the North Campus Open Space, formerly known as the Northern Devereaux Slough. And Jeff sends his greetings to the committee and the staff. So I guess that's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
All righty, thanks, Lee. Cameron, do I turn over to you for committee member and staff communications?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to remind the committee that we did have a budget subcommittee meeting on March 15th of this year, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more later. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. All right, next item on the agenda is the election of the vice chair.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This is the election of the vice chair is something the committee does every year. Normally, we do this in December. We had it on our December agenda. We had kind of a light turnout that month, so the committee decided to postpone the election of the vice chair until a later date. So we've got it on our agenda this time. Vice chair is an important position for the committee because not only does the vice chair step in and serve as the chair when the chair can't be here, but it's been the tradition in this committee for the vice chair to take over as chairperson, as Ms. Owens did starting in January, as chair of the committee. And so so it's an opportunity to kind of watch and learn. I think I think nearly everyone has served as a vice chair and as the chair of the committee before, but it is an important position. It would be great if we could fill it. We do have two people not here tonight, or one of our committee members not here tonight, but and then we have a vacancy on the committee that hopefully we'll fill in the current recruitment. But those are both brand new people to the committee, and it does help to have somebody that has some more experience. So I will turn it back to the committee to nominate and hopefully vote and elect a new vice chair. Thanks.
Does anyone like to throw their name in the ring?
Madam Chair, even though I was hoping that someone younger and more energetic and newer would step forward, I would be willing to do it to get the position filled. And if someone would like to replace me later in the year, I would certainly, if the committee is willing, I would certainly be amenable to that. But just so we don't have a vacancy for too long, I would be willing to do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Lee. Cameron, do we need to make a vote on that, or?
I think the process we've used in the past is we've had a nomination, a second, and then we take the vote. But I'm not positive that's the right approach. That's definitely a belt and suspenders approach. I think the chair actually has the authority to simply appoint the vice chair.
Well, I'd be happy to second that.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
I'll abstain.
All right, thank you, Lee, for stepping in. Maybe we can get some of our newer committee members trained and up to speed, and they can potentially step in partway through the year. All right, so moving on, we are now on item number 8 to 2017 subcommittee appointments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one, you do have the authority to appoint people to committees. The Creeks Advisory Committee has utilized subcommittees in the past for specific projects, and we have a standing subcommittee that is our budget subcommittee. And each year we take a look at what we're going to be working on that year, what we think we might want to set up a committee for. Those ad hoc committees are established. They serve their purpose that they're set up for, and then we usually dissolve those, and then the standing budget subcommittee continues on. So the tradition of the committee with regard to the budget subcommittee has been that the immediate past chair, the chair, and the vice chair are usually the three people that make up that committee. Subcommittees are limited to three people so that we don't have a quorum and we don't have any kind of Brown Act violation. So that's normally what we've done in the past, although we don't have to stick to that. And then the staff is recommending that we also continue with a education outreach ad hoc subcommittee that we have. We established that last year for the purpose of updating our public education plan. That project is still in process, and we're getting close to finalizing that. So you can either choose to appoint new people to that subcommittee or continue the roster from 2016, which was Ms. Owens, Ms. Weber, and Ms. Lomas, and we can finish out that project. It's up to you.
For the budget committee, as far as existing members, so it'd be myself, the vice chair, and then the past chair, which is him as well.
Yeah, so in this case, you might want to appoint a third person.
Would anyone else like to join the budget subcommittee? All right, great. So Danielle offered to stay on. Do we need a motion, or is that? Oh, I can appoint. Thank you, Danielle. Consider yourself on the budget committee subcommittee. And then for the education and outreach committee, it's myself and Betsy and Natasha. And are you both okay staying on that ad hoc education and outreach committee? Yep. Excellent. So I think we're set for our subcommittees for this year. Thanks, Cameron. And now on to the business items. First up, we have the Creeks Division 2017 report, and we have George Johnson, Creek Supervisor, here to give us a presentation about it. Thanks, George.
Is that on? No, it's not on. This report focuses on achievements the Creeks Division has done over the last 5 years, but also includes information going back to 2001 when the Creeks Division was created. Excuse me. The first part I'd like to go over is water quality improvement. That's a big part of our program, and we do a number of things. You can see the report. I think you all got a copy of it, and if you don't, there's some extra copies up here, and you can grab them if you want to give them to somebody, but it goes over all this stuff, but I'll just try to highlight a little bit about it. Water quality monitoring, we've sampled almost over 11,000 samples have been taken since 2001, so that's quite an accomplishment, I think. We've done this both in dry weather and in wet weather during the rain, bad conditions, and it includes doing special projects like we're currently doing at the bird refuge. Also, water quality enforcement is something we do as part of this. We go and when we get reports of people dumping illegally or something, we go out and investigate. We try to educate, issue NOVs. One good thing about this is we have noticed that generally NOVs have been going down over the last 5 years, so we think that might be a sign that water quality is improving in our creeks because there's less pollution entering there. So that's a good thing. Our creek cleanups, we've do about 50. This is the same slide. Yeah, it's 50. We've done about 50 tons of trash a year for quite a few years now, and that's a lot of trash. We have a private contractor who goes in once a week and retrieves this from the creeks and ocean, and so that really hasn't improved, unfortunately, but we are getting that trash out of the creeks. We think, there's just a lot of homeless issues in the creeks, and that they tend to have a lot of stuff that gets removed. So anyway, another part of it is BMI sampling that we do. That's benthic macroinvertebrates or bugs, and that's a way that we can track water quality over the long term and creek health, and we've been doing that for about 12 or 13 years now, and that's been a good program that we've been involved with. And then last thing we kind of been looking at recently is pesticides in our creeks, and so we are I think assisting USGS and UCSB to take a little more deeper look into sources and how bad the problem is. And that's neonics is short for neonic. I can't say it, but anyway. On to stormwater infiltration projects. So these are projects that also help to improve water quality, and we've done a bunch of these demonstration projects. In fact, we've replaced, as you can see there, over 200,000 square feet of asphalt with concrete permeable pavers. We've done them in a number of city parks and sidewalks and alleyways. Alice Keck Park, Oak Park, Stevens Park, Playa Vera Cruz, the Westside Community Center, and most recently at Quarantrina Street. So that's been an effective program to show the development community how we can improve water quality in the built environment. And then creek restoration, another big part of what we do at the Creeks Division. We have one fun statistic there that you can see is that we've planted almost 37,000 plants in trees in native. These are native plants and trees since 2001, so that's quite a bit. That's a good accomplishment. We've removed over 8 acres of arundo, which is an invasive plant, throughout the city creeks, and we planted 700 trees to replace those removed invasive plant. We've done 6 or 7 large restoration projects in our creeks. One at Arroyo Estuary, Bonet Park. We restored Old Mission Creek in a section of Old Mission Creek there. Talent Road, the golf course, the headwaters of Las Positas Creek. We did a bunch of restoration. Mission Creek Channel. We had a couple restoration projects for fish passage in the concrete portion of the channel there, and then our most recent one is Barger Canyon. We completed in 2016, and we are right now working on 3 new projects. One of them is the bird refuge. I'll highlight those in my next slides, but those are some new projects that are coming down the line. And then the last big component of what we do at the Creeks Division and highlighted in the report is our community outreach and education. And in this slide, you can see some volunteers. So that includes, we do a lot of different things through this, but volunteer events is one thing that we're able to connect with the community. We beach creek cleanups. We do volunteer planting events at our restoration sites. Also, we table at a number of community events. We just had one at Earth Day, and that was very successful, and we had some cool stuff for the kids to do. And we had Creek Man there, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And Creek Week is another big education effort that we go through. It's kind of a week to celebrate the creek and educate people about creek and water quality issues. We have youth watershed education programs that are in our local schools that teach kids about the creeks and water quality and all the stuff that we do. And Clean Water Business Program is another thing that we do as part of this education. And we have right now 176 businesses participating, so that's good participation. We have media campaigns, include TV and radio ads, things like that. And then internet and social media is also something that we try to get the word out through those newer mediums. Now I'll move on to highlight some of our projects that we're working on right now or recently. And again, this is Quarantina Street. It's 2 blocks of city streets that we removed the asphalt and put in permeable pavers. This is actually we are one of the first cities in the state to do this in a public street. Use permeable pavers, and this is done to improve water quality because the runoff that goes onto the street and the rain that falls on it infiltrates down into the ground. That helps groundwater recharge. It actually can help the street trees in this area. We had a bad root problem with some stone pines, Italian stone pines there, so we hope that will really help with the health of those trees and them getting water, and as I said, help with stormwater runoff as well as groundwater recharge. Our next thing we're going over is Creek Man. You can see here in the photo, and he's the new superhero character that was developed for our public service announcements, and it's pretty fun. People enjoy him. This is the latest Earth Day, and a photo of him and some people taking their picture with him. And anyway, it's a pretty fun project. We all like it around the office, and we think it is a great way to get our message out to the public about water quality and creek restoration. So. Nope, it's not me. So next we'll move on to a couple restoration projects we're working on. One is the Bird Refuge, Andrea Clark Bird Refuge. This one, there's some water quality problems there. As you guys might know, there's low oxygen, dissolved oxygen, so it's not good for aquatic species. We have odor events that happen periodically there. It changes colors all the time. Anyway, it has some issues, and so we are due to get some concept plans in the next month, some draft concept plans that'll go over some options for doing some restoration at that site, and that'll probably include stuff like increasing circulation between the ocean and the bird refuge, improving public access at the site, restoring some of the coastal salt marsh habitat around the margins, and just in general trying to improve the aquatic as well as the bird habitat, given that it is the bird refuge. And then the last project is that I'll talk about is Arroyo Burro Open Space Restoration Project, and that's the city's newest open space park that was purchased, I think, a year and a half ago, and was spearheaded by the Trust for Public Land, but the city moved in with some funds to help get that completed. And now we're at the point where we want to try to do some restoration along the riparian zone of that parcel. There's 2 parcels that are together there, make up 20 acres total, 20 acres, and it's about 1,600 linear feet of creek that we're looking at restoring. And basically we want to try to solve some erosion issues and try to get a little better native plant community there to improve habitat and improve water quality. And that's it. We're also getting concept plans for that project in the next month. So you can get the report for anybody who's listening online here at sbcreeks.com, and there are also printed copies here, and there is due to be a Spanish version out next week. So that's it. That concludes my presentation. Thanks.
Alrighty. Thanks so much, George. Great presentation. Does anyone have any questions for George?
Oh, at the bird, yes. So we still have that in place, and that's a tube that we placed in the bottom of the bird refuge and put a pump on it to pump water through it to improve not water, but pump air through it to try to improve circulation, see if we can help with oxygen levels. For about 4 years now, we've been doing water quality sampling in the bird refuge every week. And we go out in a kayak and take samples and oxygen and clarity and different constituents to try to determine what's going on and look at the bugs that do. Sometimes we get these big blooms in bugs and just monitor what's going on at the bird refuge to learn about it. And we have found that hasn't seemed to really help with any of the water quality, at least not that we can detect with our methods for measuring that.
I just have a couple comments. During the last session, we talked about dredging, and I gave an example of Lake Truman in Småland in Sweden, where that was very successful. So you might, I know it's very expensive, that's something they'll look into. I won't go into that because we talked about it during the last session, but the other thing is that you need to lock up and sequester all the nutrients because it's very shallow. They just keep getting recirculated from the benthos. So, you need to look at the zoo, the cemetery, and the golf course. That's obviously sources of nutrients coming into to the water. But another thing I think you can get at, because some of these things are really tough, what you could do is you could look at fish. Are there fish that are in there?
Well, right now, there might be some fish that the bird refuge was actually, it breached during the large storm events this year. And so it was connected to the ocean for almost 2 months. So there, in the past, we have reports that mullet, one species that's an ocean-going species, would go into the bird refuge and actually live there. That was when the bird refuge was being breached periodically, mechanically, in order to flush it and improve water quality and help with the issues we're trying to solve here. And so we do know that there were fish species in there. There was tidewater goby was found in there. It has been found in the bird refuge, so we know that species existed. But during the drought, the oxygen levels got so low that we're not sure if there's anything still alive in there. We have, the consultant has done some seine nets in February, I think maybe right before it broke open or shortly thereafter. So we should get some results from the concept plans as to what they saw there and what they think would help with that, helping to improve or get fish back into the bird refuge again. But
what actually, if there's no native fish, that is artificial, that whole system. So I'm sure fish have been stocked there to some degree. People don't want to get rid of little joey, so rather than flush them or boil them, they take them to these places.
Yeah, the only thing that I know of that's been stocked is mosquito fish, and that's for mosquito control. So it's a pretty tough environment to live in because the salinity levels go up and down, and the mullet and the tidewater goby can accommodate that. Mm-hmm. And they're both native species that have been found in the bird refuge in the past. So we're hopeful that if we can improve circulation, that those species will come back or be able to survive better if they've been able to hang on through the drought.
Okay. Well, if it's so basically though, if it's primarily, I don't know if it's brackish, but if it's primarily freshwater and you have fish that are in there that are stocked that are zooplanktivorous fish, you might consider trying to remove them, because the problem is as you know, I'm sure you look at food webs, if you remove those fish that eat large Daphnia, you're going to have an algal problem. But if you remove the fish and you have Daphnia magna and Pulicaria doing really well, the algal populations will drop and they'll stay that way.
Right.
So you might want to think about food webs.
So we'll see what we get, from the results of the seine netting to see what kind of fish are in there right now.
Yeah.
And it's hard. for us probably to remove the mosquito fish because of can be a pretty bad mosquito area, and so there needs to be, that is one pretty effective way to try to keep those under control. So I don't know if we'll be able to get rid of that fish, but that is something we can consider.
Yep, but that definitely is a fish that eats Daphnia 100%.
Oh, for sure.
So,
Yeah.
Yep. Just some thoughts.
Thanks. And we are looking at dredging, by the way. It is expensive, as you said, but maybe not the whole bird refuge, but making some deeper areas and maybe some channels to help improve with circulation. Because that's, as you said, nutrients is the big issue there, and we have nutrient sources, and it just doesn't get flushed frequently, especially in these drought years. So that stuff sits there, and it creates the blooms and then the odors and the lack of oxygen.
Yeah, I mean, just, none of this stuff is, rocket science. It's just, I did my master's thesis at Zaca Lake looking exactly at these issues, but that's a much deeper lake.
Yeah.
But they suffer from the same issues. And so they have, very high nutrients in that watershed. It's a Monterey Formation, so you get a lot of phosphorus coming in. And but you can tackle it through the removal of fish, because I had very large enclosures out there through many years, and those stayed, the secchi depth was like 7 meters, whereas during the spring bloom you'd have half a meter secchi depth in areas that had fish. So
Right.
it does work. The owners didn't want to get rid of the fish because
Whatever. Yeah.
even though they weren't native.
Right. Yeah. Well, we'll take a look. And as I said, I don't know if any fish were in there over the last few years, because the oxygen levels were zero for weeks, so I don't think a lot can live in that. We did see, I think we saw some of the mosquito fish trying to gulp air, and I guess they can do that for a little while, but
Yeah,
I don't
but the
know.
good thing about a lot of these zooplankton is that they actually have buffers in their hemoglobin, so they can live in really low oxygen conditions. So
as opposed to the fish. Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. We get Daphnia blooms too, as you said, and we get huge ones, and then boom. I think we had one a week ago,
yeah.
a week or two ago.
But
big
fowl will bring them in on their feathers, so I mean you don't
Right.
really need to worry. They'll just keep coming in.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. It blooms and busts, and
Okay.
yeah. So
We don't. We've had, since we've been monitoring it weekly, we've had 2 years in which we've had large Daphnia blooms. I mean, I don't know, billions of them
Right.
throughout the water column, and that usually lasts a couple weeks, and then they will die off. But they do consume algae when they're there.
Right. They're boom and bust, right? Because
Yep.
once their resource is gone, they'll die. But there's always a small population, and then as algae start to return, they'll follow that trajectory. So
We haven't seen that happening, but Jill Murray's been on our staff has been monitoring that really closely, and what we should do is have you talk directly to her, because she can answer all the questions on the specific lengths of time and what we've seen. But we have gone entire years where we haven't seen that kind of bloom happen, and we're out there on the water once a week at least.
So it's a difficult. This one's difficult. We've talked to a lot of people, and it's the shallowness of it, and the fact that it just doesn't. There's no outlet. Kind of like I think Zaca Lake. Maybe it doesn't have an outlet. I'm not sure about that, but sort of. Yeah.
it sort of does.
Yeah.
But there's no inlet. It's fed by an aquifer. So.
Yeah, this one sort of does too. Like if the berm breaches, then there's an outlet, and then you get exchange. Both saltwater comes in, mostly fresh water go out if you have a lot of rain, but it goes both ways, and that now oxygen levels are way up, and it's totally different. But how long that'll last and what's going to happen over the summer just remains to be seen. So
I had to, in my past, permit certain projects like this. Malibu Lake was one of them. And there was a couple lakes in Simi Valley on a golf course, and they had the same issues. And they found out that dredging really did help, and it'll also control your cattail population, because you need a certain depth for the cattails, and if you go deeper than that, at least they won't be able to grow into the lake any farther.
right.
So you may want to do some research on what the other what kind of program the other lakes went through. I may even have some of those old documents, but
Yeah, we did look at dredging. We did a small study with the consultant who's developing the concept plans. We looked at sediments to try to determine, how deep the clay layer is, because there's a clay layer that kind of keeps the water in the bird refuge. And then we looked at where we could get rid of that sediment if we
That's
did
huge.
dredge it. And that was the huge issue. And because getting it deep, like you said, is usually a way that could significantly help with water quality problems, but it doesn't completely solve the odor, because those lakes will still flip sometimes and you'll still get odor events. And so it's very, very expensive. The material size is too small, the grain size is too small to dump into the ocean, so we're not able to use that option. We would have to truck it. We're talking $20 million, a price tag that nobody was comfortable really trying to move forward. So a big dredging effort's off the table, but a smaller one where we might be able to use this material on site and create some more coastal salt marsh habitat, that would help with birds and would help with the water quality if we can get some deep areas and a refuge for aquatic organisms when it is drier. So,
thank you.
All those great comments.
I would just add, there's a lot of questions about the bird refuge, and as George mentioned in the presentation, we have completed quite a bit of technical studies, and we have a conceptual design being prepared. The City Council was presented with a range of alternatives to look at to give us direction on what they would like to see, and I think we had 8 alternatives. They chose 3 of those that they wanted us to proceed with. We're doing that, like as George mentioned, I think in the next month or so. I think we expect to receive something from the consultant that has some plans. So we'll probably be back to the committee, I'm thinking probably in June, where we'll have a more complete presentation on that particular project and on some of the detail and the background on that one. Okay.
All right, thanks, George. Thanks, Cameron. So that item was just for discussion. So we're moving on to business item B, fiscal year 2018-19 budget. Pass it back to Cameron.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing the proposed budget for fiscal year 18 and 19 for the Creeks Division. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the budget process. For those, most of you have been involved in this, but for those who have not, the city works on a 2-year budget process in which we develop a 2-year financial plan, and then we look really closely at the fiscal year to come. So our fiscal year goes from July 1st through June 30th. And so I'm going to talk about both FY18 and 19, but really focus in on the FY18 proposed budget tonight. As I mentioned earlier, the budget was presented to the Creeks Advisory Committee Budget Subcommittee on March 15th. The committee made a recommendation to the full committee in support of the proposed budget. We're here at the full committee tonight. I wanted to explain to you why we had to move our meeting. Our regularly scheduled meeting was last week, and we had it timed to what we thought was just right, so that the city council would receive the budget from the city administrator last week. We would be able to present the budget. That meeting was rescheduled, so the city council was presented with the budget yesterday, and we wait until after they've heard the full city budget before we come to the committees and commissions. The Parks and Recreation Commission had their meeting scheduled for the same day, so today. So I was there earlier this afternoon. I wanted to let you know that several commissioners spoke about their appreciation for this committee and the subcommittee's review of the budget, and they made a recommendation to City Council to support the budget, but their recommendation is subject to the committee's input from this afternoon. So it's a sort of a conditional recommendation at this point. And then we will, the entire budget for the city was presented to City Council yesterday. We will present the Creeks Division budget to the City Council on May 15th as part of the Parks and Recreation Department budget. And then City Council makes its ultimate budget decisions in June. As you all know, the Creeks Division is funded almost entirely from Measure B, which is a voter-approved hotel bed tax. So it was passed in November of 2000. It's a 2% bed tax where all the funds go into a special fund, and that fund use is restricted to improving stormwater quality, surface water quality, and also to carry out creek restoration projects. So the budget that I'll be presenting tonight is consistent with Measure B and also consistent with the Creeks Fund, the Creeks Program funding guidelines, which were established and adopted by this committee. Okay, so moving into the numbers, I'll start with our projected revenue. One of the things that is unusual this year compared to the last few years, but is not unique, is that the revenue projected to come from Measure B for the coming fiscal year is actually lower than the current fiscal year. So the city's finance department forecasts what they anticipate coming in through hotel bed taxes. The finance department's forecast for next year shows us about $100,000 less than their forecast for this year. Other revenue sources are essentially the same, so we're looking at about $100,000 decrease in revenue. One thing I want to point out about our revenue projections is we don't count pending grants or potential future grant revenues as sources of revenue. They're just too speculative. All of the grants that we apply for are competitive, and they are very competitive. So we don't count those dollars until we actually have them. And on the expenditure side, our proposed FY18 budget is substantially similar to the current year budget. There are a few notable exceptions to that. The main one being a significant increase in our capital program spending. So for our capital projects in the current fiscal year, we're just under $1.5 million. For next fiscal year, we're coming in just under $2 million. So we're moving more funds to our capital program than we did in the current year. Another line item where you see some differences in our supplies and services. You see about a $100,000 increase there. That is largely made up of two line items in the budget. One is both of them are one-time line items. So about half of that increase is associated with a water quality public opinion survey. That is something that we're required to do under our stormwater permit. We do that every 5 years. The other half of the increase is funds we want to set aside for updates to our stormwater technical guidance manual, and that manual may be updated as part of our permit reissuance, which is coming up in about 16 months, and so we want to have funds available to do that kind of technical update. As I mentioned, those are both permit-driven costs, and they're one-time costs, and so you see it bumps up a little bit in FY18, drops right back to the same level in the proposed FY19 budget. So those are the most significant changes in our budget from last year. Here's a pie chart that breaks our budget down by category. As you can see, at 42% of the budget, our capital program is our single largest line item. That's pretty typical of the way we've established our budget over the last many years, followed by staff salaries and benefits and our supplies and professional services at about 25% each from the budget. We also like to break down for the committee how the money is being spent. This is our breakdown for our proposed operating budget for next year. Approximately half of the operating budget goes to water quality improvement programs. A quarter of the budget goes to creek restoration programs, and a quarter goes to community outreach and education. These numbers can change pretty dramatically if we factor in how the capital part of the budget is being spent, but this gives you an idea on our operating funds, how we're dividing the money. So again, to sum up, our key issues in this year's budget are we have an increase in our capital improvement program spending, $450,000. We have a decrease in our Measure B revenues of $95,000. And we have our water quality survey and our stormwater treatment manual update, making up a one-time approximately $100,000 increase in our operating budget. And then as you noticed, our revenue for the year is approximately $4 million. Our proposed expenditures are approximately $4.6 million. So we're proposing to transfer just over $600,000 from our reserve to largely to fund our capital program in the coming year. That's not unusual for those of you who've been around a while. I went back and looked at our last 10 years, and approximately half of those years we've transferred funds from the reserves to fund capital projects. So I'll talk a little more about the reserves in a little bit. These are getting into a little more detail on some of the numbers. Our water quality research and monitoring budget is proposed to stay the same as the current year. Those are the breakdowns or some of the line items in that category. Other continuing programs are being funded at substantially the same levels. So we do spend $150,000 a year Measure B funds on creek cleanups, and so we have contractors that are actually out removing trash from the creeks and from the shoreline in the city. They're out 2, sometimes 3 times a week, and we do have some very problematic locations where we actually have them returning to those same spots over and over again. Through that program, we remove about 55 tons of trash every year from the creeks and the beach. Our creek restoration project maintenance, about $175,000. That's roughly the same as past years. Interestingly, with our creek restoration project maintenance, the cost on a per project basis goes down over time. So when we install a new restoration project, it's more expensive up front, but over time as the plants establish and mature, we don't need to weed anymore, we don't need to water them anymore, and they get cheaper and cheaper. The reason that line item stays close to the same every year is we have more and more projects out there. So on a per project basis, less expensive, but as we create more of them, it keeps our budget roughly the same. And we do, as the Creeks Division goes through the city and restores these areas, Creeks Division continues to maintain those so that they don't become a burden on other divisions or departments within the city. Creeks Division funds a youth watershed education program. We contract a lot of that work out to Explore Ecology, and they do a wonderful job with in-class and field trip watershed education for students. We have the opportunity to provide watershed education to over 3,000 students per year, every year. And then we have TV, radio, and print advertising campaigns. That's part of our outreach and education effort. And I know you all know this, but just to remind the public, our our biggest pollution problem in the city of Santa Barbara is runoff pollution. That's something that all of us participate in creating, and so our outreach and education efforts are designed to let people know where that pollution comes from, what their role is in it, so that they can try to reduce or prevent water pollution. Moving on to the capital program, these are the proposed funding amounts for various projects we're working on over the next 2 years. As you all know, we don't fund our projects all at once in 1 year. We try to provide more transparency by providing some funds to each of the projects over the course of the development of that project. So we have lots of different components to putting to doing a capital project. There's our outreach in the surrounding area and to the public. There's planning for the project and permitting and environmental review, design work to be done, and then the actual construction of the project. And so what we try to do is time everything out so we've got enough funds to do each component of the project as we're moving through it, and then when we get to construction, we don't have a massive cost. We've kind of set aside the money and we're ready to go. And when we are able to get grant funds, some of the times that's great because we don't have enough to construct the project. Other times we do have enough to construct the project. The grant funds allow us to bring that money back. We put it in the reserves and then we move it right back into another project. So the committee's gone over this list. We went over it and approved it in November. But I did want to just highlight a couple of these projects. The second one on the list is stormwater treatment retrofit projects. As you know, we've done a number of demonstration projects with permeable pavers. We saw those in the last presentation. The Creeks Division never intended to set out to repave the city of Santa Barbara. We wanted to create some examples of how you could do a more water quality friendly infrastructure. But we're moving on from that, and in the next year we want to do a couple demonstration dry wells, so where we're catching runoff from mostly in right-of-way areas like the street, for example, and we're treating that through natural treatment in the soil in a dry well, and also we're also going to try to site those where we can look for opportunities for groundwater recharge into drinking water as well. And then I think George talked about a few of those projects. The only other one I want to bring up is there's one called Lower Arroyo Burrow Restoration Project, and I have a little work to do to try to make these names more clear. We've got a lot of Arroyo Burrow restoration, and wanted to let the committee know we haven't begun our outreach for that project yet, but we're getting close to that, and that's going to be a restoration project in the Hidden Valley Park area where we have a lot of opportunities for improving the condition of the creek in that area. So we will have a lot going on in Arroyo Burrow next year. This chart shows where the sources of our capital improvement program funding over the years, and the blue part of the chart is Measure B funds that have gone to capital projects, and the green is grant funding that has come in for capital projects. And Creeks Division, since its inception, has been very aggressive at looking to leverage Measure B dollars with grant funding. We've been very successful at it, as you can see. Since the Creeks Division was founded, we've received over $18.5 million in grant funding. But one of the things this chart shows is that it is up and down. We have had several years where we've received more grant funding for our capital program than we received from the entirety of Measure B. So we've been able to more than double the Measure B revenue that we had. But other years, and I don't think we've had 1 year where we got completely skunked, but we did get close to that in FY14, as you can see. And there's just a little green strip on the top of there. I think we got a $10,000 grant that year to just keep our perfect record going. But but we will continue to look for every opportunity. We look at federal, state, and private foundation grant sources. And part of the up and down is the availability of funds, and part of the ups and downs are the fit of our projects and programs with available grant funding sources. Our reserves are projected for the Creeks Fund are projected to be approximately $3.8 million at the end of this year. And over the next 2 years, we're proposing to use some of those reserves, again, largely to fund those increases in our capital program. So we do anticipate ending FY19 with about $2.9 million in reserve. That's very close to our reserve target amount. So the Creeks Advisory Committee has come up with appropriate uses for reserves, which are identified as capital projects, grant funding matches, and to address revenue shortfalls in economically lean times. The committee has recommended that we keep a reserve balance that could fund 2 large projects. We've always identified a large project cost as about $1.5 million. So our target is a $3 million reserve balance. So you can see we'll be just shy of that, but we'll be very close to that at the end of the next 2 years. And again, if we're able to receive grant funds for projects, that's what enables us to end up with a larger reserve balance, which allows us to do more capital projects. And so with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Here's Creekman in the comic book, what do we call that? Face and hole wall that was that Jen Hollywood and Liz Smith created for Earth Day. And it's really fun. People could get there and take a picture. So even Creekman put his own face in the Creekman comic book for Earth Day. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Does anyone have any questions about the budget? Lee?
I don't have any questions because some of us were briefed at the subcommittee meeting. But for those people in the audience and those people watching at home, I hope that they can appreciate from Mr. Benson's summary the amount of thought and detail that our staff and the committee and the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Parks and Recreation staff put into getting the most efficiency and leverage and productivity out of every penny of Measure B money that we have. And it's not just being able to leverage the outside grants for which our community is one of the most successful in the entire state many years, but the care and thought that goes into every recommendation in all the budget columns. And I think a lot of that thoughtfulness and long-range planning was also represented in the previous item when George gave an overall outline of all the different projects and programs that are administered here that are funded by this kind of budget with support in the community and outside funds. So I know people are always asking, especially in municipal election years, is the city's money being wisely spent? And I think that anyone who has listened to this presentation and George's and takes the time to read it will see that our staff working with the Budget and Finance Department and the city administrator are literally watching every penny and every dollar. And so I want to thank you not only for an excellent presentation, but for all the due diligence that you put in year after year.
Anyone else? Any comments or questions? Excellent. Well, thanks again, Cameron. So now the recommendation is that the committee recommend the approval of the proposed Creeks Division fiscal year 2018-2019 budget to the Parks and Rec Commission and the City Council.
I'd like to second that motion.
Oh, I was making the motion. All right. I was just reading that we were making one. I'll make the motion. Lee will second it. Can we get a vote, please? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Motion carries. And it is now 6:35. So unless there's any further questions or comments from
As part of my motion to consider adjournment, I was hoping, in terms of discussion of that motion, that if anyone who was at the Blue Water Ball the other day has a really brief summary, I would appreciate it.
What Lee is referring to is Channel Keeper's annual fundraising gala, which took place following a Fun Earth Day Saturday up at the Deckers headquarters. It was a great evening. We had the executive director, former UCSB alumni, Sarah, who is California Coastkeeper Director, speak about the issues that Coastkeepers working on statewide, as well as the importance of work that keepers do locally as well. So it was a fun time. Thanks for that, Lee. I'm going to get back to business here. It's about 6:35. Do I have anyone that'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening? I will. All right. Any second? Second. All right, excellent. Do we have to vote? All in favor? Aye. All in favor? Aye. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Cameron and Jen and